Hey, and welcome back to another Learning Java 2D game programming video. So in our last video, we mostly made some refactoring so that now not every single UI component is listening to the click and on drag events. Instead, we introduced something called a MouseConsumer and a mouse handler. And so the mouse handler has one active consumer at a time, and it will then tell that consumer if we are dragging or clicking on it. So that worked, and it actually gave us some benefits as well, so that we can start clicking and dragging and we don't have to be inside and all of that. And this will be used today. So today we are going to be placing tiles. So as I showed you in the last video, we have this grass tile, which I'm not sure if we're going to use eventually. Just like we're not going to use this, we're going to have to make an entire tile set soon. But for placing tiles, we're going to use it, and we're going to see how that goes. So there's no time like the present. I am going to start by popping over to our new mouse package inside of the input package. And I'm actually going to make another package inside of here. I'm going to say action. So there can be actions attached to our mouse. So let's start by making an abstract class called MouseAction. So public abstract class, and this action is also going to be implementing the MouseConsumer interface. But it's going to have a couple more things. So MouseAction, first of all, it's going to definitely want an update method. And now we are not any longer inside of the interface, but in the abstract class. So now we actually have to declare its visibility. And so public abstract void update state. That's how that's gonna look. And an action can have some sort of preview image or any type of graphic attached to it. So I'm gonna say public abstract UI image, which is a UI component we don't have, so we have to create it. And I'm gonna say get preview or get, well, we've used sprite everywhere else, so sure, why not? Get sprites. So a mouse action can have a sprite, which will be of type UI image. And the reason why I'm choosing UI image is because a UI component has a position and a size and all of that, which we're gonna need to use when we render this. Just an image isn't gonna be enough. We're gonna have to know where do we want to draw this image. So let's head over to the UI package, and this is not going to be a clickable, so let's just put it in the top level of the UI package, a class called UI image. And this is a UI component. Alt enter and generate these. So currently this isn't going to do anything on update. I'm just going to close that off. This will contain an image. Alt insert. Let's make a constructor. So the UI image takes an image, and when we ask for the sprite, we return the image that we have. And this inherits everything from UI components, so I think that we are quite done, except let's just say that the size of this will be the size of the image that we pass in, unless we say otherwise. So image observers, I always pass in null. There we go. Shouldn't be harder than that. Now we can import it. Great, so this is how we're gonna start out. So let's make an action. And I'm gonna have an action be a TilePlacer. So this will of course extend MouseAction. let's Alt-Enter, implement the methods. So here are all of the things that we need. So a TilePlacer, what's it gonna keep? We're gonna have the tile that we're gonna place. And let's see, we are gonna want to store this UI image, and I'm gonna call it preview UI. Preview UI? Maybe just preview. We can change it if we want to. I'm gonna keep what grid we are currently hovering. So grid X, grid Y, and I think that's it. Alt insert, let's make a constructor, and I'm just gonna take in the tile. So great, here we go. Let's create that UI image. So preview is equal to a new UI image, and let's just get the sprite from the tile. So it's just taking this graphics, this sprite, and making it its own. In the update is where we are going to be setting the position of this UI image to be where our mouse is. So just to try this out, let's do it the simplest way. Let's just set it to wherever our mouse is at first, and then we'll set it inside of the grid squares. So I'm gonna say preview, set absolute position, new position. Actually, that's not what we said. We said get input, get mouse position. So now it should always follow the mouse everywhere. When we say get sprite, we just return preview. And currently on click, we're gonna do nothing. We're gonna do stuff in the on drag, but let's just wait with that just a little while, and let's see if we can't render this out. So now we need to go into the mouse handler, because we're gonna have to store a mouse action. I'm gonna say primary button action, so the left mouse button. All right, and I'm gonna say handle primary button. And do I need to send anything in? Not sure yet, so I'm just gonna hold off. Handle primary button. So I'm gonna say if primary button action is a null, then let's just do set active consumer to the primary button action. And we can do that because they're both mouse consumers. And this will also be fine, because if we already have an active consumer, which might be a UI element or something else, then it's not going to set anything. It only sets it if it's null. So we can just say set active consumer. Also, primary button action update. And now we did need the state. All right, so let's just pass in the state. All right, so we are handling that. We are gonna need a setter. Let's do Alt insert, make a setter for the primary button action. And let's just first find our editor state here. And let's say mouse handler set primary button action. And we have the TilePlacer. And this needs a tile. So the only problem is currently this tile, it wants the sprite library, of course, but we have a default value for the tile, which is the wood floor, because it's the only one we've had. But now I want to be able to pass in what name of the tile that we want. So I'm going to say grass, and we need to update this inside of the tile class. So I'm going to make another constructor, which also takes in the tile name. And instead of wood floor here, I'm going to say tile name. This of course means that we most likely want to use that constructor instead, and then just sending in wood floor. So this should be fine. All right, so we have a TilePlacer, which is set here. I'm gonna say from the mouse handler, I'm gonna do public UI image get primary button sprite, maybe? Or get sprite? Get primary button UI. I'm gonna say that. It's short and sweet. All right, so if our primary button action isn't null, actually, you know what? Let's make this an optional. There we go. So this can be empty. So if primary button action isn't null, then let's return optional of nullable, I guess. And let's get the primary button action get sprite. All right. And if we don't even have a primary button action, let's just return an empty optional. There we go. We need this when we are going to be rendering, which we're going to be doing now. So let's find our renderer. There we go. And I'm going to consider this preview UI thing to be a part of the UI rendering sort of layer, if you will. So at the time of rendering the UI, that's when we're going to render this. But I still wanted to render beneath maybe menus or, you know, the minimap or whatever. So let's render it before we render all the regular UI. So I'm going to say state get mouse handler get primary button UI. If present, which we can do since it's an optional, if present, then we have the UI image here, and we'll do graphics.draw image, and we are drawing it at the we are drawing the sprite from the UI image at the UI image get absolute position int x, and the UI image get absolute position int y, and null for the observer. All right, I think it's ready to be tested. Let's see if we missed something. And it looks as though it is working. So as you can see, the tile is following our mouse. So currently it's taking the exact position of our mouse, which you can see here, top left corner, all the things that we've always talked about. So we're gonna have to do something to make it be inside of the grid. So let's do that now. Let's head over to the TilePlacer, and here in the updates, we don't really want to do exactly this, but instead, let's first of all get a copy of this mouse position. All right, then let's add the camera position. So get camera. All right, so now we know what grid we are hovering. The camera position plus the mouse position on the screen will be the grid that we are hovering. So let's start by saving that in these variables that we have. So that will be equal to the int x position divided by the game.sprite size. All right. So now we know which grid we are hovering, but we need to make sure that this preview image gets put in the right position when being rendered. So now that we have the camera position, we need to take away the remainder when dividing. So the modulus. You see what I mean? I think this is what we do, or do we add it? Sorry, just have to think. No, we definitely subtract it. Yes. So new position, and we're going to say the position that we have, int x, and then modulus game.sprite size. Do the same for y, position int y, modulus game.sprite size. That was not a modulus sign or a percentage sign. There we go. All right, and after we have done this, we can take away the camera position again because we want the screen position, but we needed to have it to get the proper grid. So let's subtract the camera position. All right, let's see if that worked. We also need to put the right position in here. So position. All right, and that seemed to do the trick. Let's move it over, and it still seems to be working. Awesome. As you can see, the preview image doesn't really care that we are outside of the game map, and I am okay with that for now, as long as we can't actually click out here or do anything. All right, so let's get to the actual placing, which I'm going to do on the on drag so that we can actually click and drag, so we don't have to click on every single tile that we want to switch. So on drag, and we have the grid X and grid Y now. So this should be quite easy. I'm going to say if state get game map grid within bounds, which we don't have yet. I'm going to say grid X and grid Y. So this is going to check that we are inside the map before we do anything. And if it is, then state get game map set tile at grid X and grid Y. I'm going to want a tile copy of the tile that we save here. And you're going to see why probably in the next video, but inside of the tile, we're going to extend it eventually, and it's going to keep the tile. So currently it's just a 64 by 64 pixel image, but it's going to be a much larger image with different types of tiles like corners and things like that. And we're going to keep the entire image in the tile, but the tile is going to have the index, which it should fetch the sub image from. And if we give the exact same tile object to each grid position, then, well, it's going to be the exact same instance. So if we change the index, it's going to change for all of them. So we need to have a copy. That's why we're doing this. And these are many things that we need to make. So let's start up here, grid within bounds. Let's create it inside of the game map. And this is just gonna say if grid X is larger than or equal to 0 and grid X is smaller than tiles.length and grid Y is larger than or equal to 0 and grid Y is smaller than tiles something.length. Looking, since they're all the same length, we can just look in one of them. So now we know if we are inside of the bounds, and then we want to set, and actually this is not gonna probably understand since we haven't done this yet, so this doesn't have a return type. And it's not gonna return an object, of course, it's gonna return a tile. And we send in the tile that we want to copy. And in order to copy a tile, we don't need the sprite library, which we do. We want to use the sprite library when we create tiles from the outside, but when we copy, we just want to copy the image that it has. So we're going to want to make a constructor, but we don't want it to be accessible from outside of this class. So let's make a private constructor. And this just takes in an image sprite. So this sprite is equal to sprites. That way we can just say return new tile and then pass in the sprite. Oop, not the user principal. All right, you are sad. What did I do? Oh, right, sorry. Of course, get sprite. There we go. Sorry. That should be it. Let's go back to the TilePlacer. Now we should be able to create this method, and it understood that we wanted a tile that we don't want to be called copy of. There we go. So let's find tiles, and I'm going to say grid X, whoop, grid Y. That's going to be equal to this tile. All right, let's try that out. And here you can see it. It is actually placing the tile, and it's not being placed behind us because right now when I click here, the UI minimap is consuming our mouse clicks. As here, it's fine. I can turn it on and off and nothing happens behind it. I don't place the tile. So that's awesome. Let's now also update our minimap to reflect our changes. So let's find the UI minimap. It is a clickable. All right. Now we have a little problem, and that is that our minimap, we wanted to uncouple it. So the state doesn't know if it has a minimap or if it doesn't have a minimap, which means the game map doesn't know if there is a minimap or not. So there's no way of really telling the minimap that I have updated, please update. And I feel like there are two ways that we could go. We could say that a game map, or rather a game map knows about the minimap. So a game map knows that when it's updated, it can tell the minimap to update, but I don't want to force the game map to have a minimap. So instead, I'm actually gonna just, inside of this minimap component, I'm gonna add a fixed interval, generate the minimap image. So let's do that. If we say state get time, seconds dividable by, and I'm gonna say 0.25. So basically every 4 times every second. So if the second that we are, or the time that we have right now, that's second, is divisible by this exactly. So this would happen 4 times in a second. And then what do? We generate the map. All right. Now let's just make this. All right, so the first thing I want to do, we have the updates to start. And I'm going to say if that modulus get updates from seconds. Unfortunately, I think, or is equal to 0 there. So we are transforming the seconds that we send in to amount of updates. So if the updates to start modulus that amount of updates is equal to 0, then let's go ahead and do the thing. The only problem is this currently takes in an int. So let's take in a double, which means we need to do some math.round this. And the round gives a long, so let's turn that into an int. And I think that will be good. So let's try that out. And would you look at that? So our minimap is now updating, and since it is just rescaling the tile sprite size, this minimap will always be pretty accurate. So that is awesome. I'm really happy about this. Let's just make a larger, I'm gonna say like 64 by 64. All right, so now as you can see, this is quite a large map. M3 8 3 2. All right. I'm sorry. So that will be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully we'll get to some actual tile sets soon. So that's it. Hej då!